Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I'm an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. In each episode of this show, I will discuss how to navigate the divorce process, come out stronger and empowered on the other side.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. Each week, we discuss issues including divorce, custody, alimony, paternity, narcissism, mediation, and a whole lot of other family law issues to provide insight on the journey of women winning divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. Today, I'm being joined by Jenny Bradley, a family law attorney and owner of Triangle Smart Divorce in North Carolina. With her 24 years of experience practicing family law, Jenny has dedicated her practice to helping people move on. Her passion is helping smart people make smart, long-term decisions in marriage and divorce. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I like that. Okay, so how do you make smart people make smart decisions? I just have to ask.
Well, one of the first things we do is we talk about goals. We ask a lot of questions like, where are you now and where do you want to be? And how can we help you get there? And sometimes people don't know what all their options are. They know what their friends have told them, what they've Googled on the internet, what their great law degree from Google has told them. And they don't know that things can be done differently in a settlement than if you go to court. And so a lot of times, we have to dig in and be like, what do you really want? And then,
awesome. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not make, we overtalked each other there a little. So let me say, try to help them not make emotional decisions, which is often hard to do when you're going through a process like divorce.
Well, I think that is one of the number one challenges in family law, because it is such an emotional process because it's so much of your life, and guiding individuals through that and helping to make a little bit more of an objective decision based on the future. It takes a lot of effort, certainly by the attorneys and buy-in from the clients for sure. But I'd love to hear, how did you get into family law? And most important, why do you continue to practice it?
So how I got into family law, not everybody believes this story, but believe it or not, your choice. I went to law school, and frankly, it really didn't speak to me a lot. We had these classes and they were talking about property rights and tax classes and civil procedure classes. And then I had a family law class and I was like, whoa, I can take my psychology degree and I can take a little bit of the best parts of all these areas of the law, and it all comes together in family law. And then I actually feel like I'm doing some good. My parents continued to stay married, and frankly, I'm not so sure they should have based upon some things I lived through as a child. And I thought, you know what? Good people don't need to stay in bad marriages. There's a way out, and I want to help bring that to other people. And so I've always done family law. I know that's not your history, but for me, that was really the only thing that appealed to me and kind of called to me.
Well, what I find is those of us who either started in family law or found our way there and really enjoy it, it's because of what we're passionate about, and we're able to really do something to help people every day. All right. So today's topic, which I think, I know we're going to make it interesting. We're going to have a great conversation, but I think it's really interesting in the current economy, as, we are living right now in 2023. And of course, we hear a lot going on. Those of us, who are awake and paying attention, a lot's happened over the past few years, and we're probably going to be experiencing, whether a full-on recession, we're certainly going to have some changes in the economy. And I thought it would be great if we could have a dialogue about, divorce, and now, either now or kind of looking at what is coming. And we're seeing inflation rise to a high that we really haven't seen since the 80s. Now, not that I was paying attention to inflation in the 80s. But it's hard to believe that was 40 years ago. So, tell me a little bit about some maybe things you're seeing and your kind of overall thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, this one's weird. I kind of do remember the 80s. My parents bought their first house in the 80s, and I remember them saying things about the interest rate and having to wait every other day to get gas and all that stuff. So, It might be 40 years ago, but I remember some of that. And this one is weird right now because housing prices are up. It's a tight labor market right now, but yet inflation is at an all-time high, from what most people have seen of our age going on. And so it's quite different than the 80s, and it's quite different than the housing bubble that burst, when you came into your own practice. It's a different world now. So it's a little odd. And I think some things that we're going to see are going to be people who live paycheck to paycheck, which is always a problem with divorce anyway, no matter the economy, right? But
Absolutely.
people who live paycheck to paycheck are really going to feel more of a squeeze as we head into the next couple of years. And people who have been able to accumulate wealth and accumulate assets, maybe people that are able to create more value in the world and therefore make more money, are not going to feel it as much. Unlike the housing boom, where a lot of people had their wealth tied up in real estate, and that all collapsed, and they lost a ton of their wealth from their real estate investments and other things. And so I think it's going to be even tighter on people in lower income brackets and even some of the middle class, unlike the other one that I think hit people at the higher end of the wealth brackets. That's my theory. I'm no economist. My degree was in psychology, and I am a lawyer. So, take what you want from me for economic advice. But
I think it's good because it's what we're seeing, right? It's what we're seeing, what we're reading. But just like you said, I think gas went up. It's come down a bit, not as crazy, but and this affects everybody, no matter what your bracket. The cost of groceries is a bit ridiculous. It's not, I don't always pay attention, to the prices in the grocery store because, kids want this or that, but like a box of cereal is truly $7. And I was shocked by that. And I am thinking how much of an impact this is going to have on the majority of people divorcing, because, all right, whatever the incomes, whether it was one or two, it was one household, and then going into two households, and the kids still eat the same amount, right? And so to most, parents probably try to eat a little less, maybe, I don't know, but that's going to be a real impact on what it costs people to live and the money coming in.
Sure. That's a great point. Candidly, I've not bought groceries. I couldn't tell you when, so I really haven't paid attention to that. I'm one of these horrible people who eats meals out frequently. So I don't know, but that is true. What you just said is very true. And what we tell people all the time when we're starting to look at them going through divorce and looking at budgets, and we get that, is it cheaper to keep him than leave him discussion that we have with women, because
right.
You're going to be in two households, and I haven't found a place yet that you can buy half a box of cereal, right? You got to buy the whole box of cereal, even if your child's not with you all the time anymore, to use your example. So I think that's somewhere that the impact is going to be, that two households never live as cheaply as one, no matter what the economy is. And there are day-to-day things now, like you're pointing out, like groceries and gasoline that, may be more expensive when you're having to do more commuting. And like I said, you have to get a loaf of bread. You're not going to go to the store and buy 4 pieces.
Right. And, I think that, and what I want to talk about is the differences, because your practice is in North Carolina. I practice in Florida, and I was looking at the, just some statistics, and some of the statistics or predictions are that the slowing economy is going to start to bring inflation rates down, but by the end of 2023. So that's what's predicted. We know that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but if somebody's wanting a divorce now, they might not be able to wait till the end of the year. But North Carolina is a little bit different than Florida. So what do you tell somebody who's like, I want to be divorced now and move on with my life?
Well, the first thing we tell them is we're in this archaic state called North Carolina that makes you wait a year after you've separated to be able to get divorced. So if you want to be divorced at the end of 2023, you've already missed the deadline because we're in 22. You should have separated last year. So, people don't understand what that really means, though, Heather. That doesn't mean you can't work everything out in advance. You can work everything out. Mm-hmm. We are a state that doesn't hold the divorce hostage, and we don't tie all the other settlement to the divorce. It really is a split process. Fancy word is bifurcated process. But you can work out your alimony, you can work out your child support, you can work out your custody, you can work out your separation agreement, you can put this in a court order, you can do it by private agreement, and all that can be done with a little bow on it and all done. And then you're just sitting around like this, waiting for your 12 months to pass. It's 12 months from physically separate.
Now, okay, so maybe what if they came into your office today and said, I moved out in August. Is that good enough? You didn't have to necessarily file something to indicate on the day of separation. Would that work?
100%. You're correct, Heather. If they come in and they say, we physically separated in August, we no longer live in the same household, that's their date of separation. Could the other spouse challenge that in court and say, oh no, they didn't move out? Yeah, sure. If you can prove they didn't move out, that's fine. But most people are going to have a lease, or they're going to have a friend they moved in with that can vouch for them, a family member. Maybe they've been able to buy a house, whatever. They're going to have some piece of paper with utilities or something that's going to show that they are living in a separate place. It's tricky during COVID, right? Because we had those people who were living in one city and telecommuting, if you will. And so some people wanted to say, well, we've separated. I'm like, no, you haven't separated. Your bank accounts are still together. All their stuff's still in the house. When they come home for the weekend, they come to the house. That's not separation.
So, that's really interesting because even though we're talking about the economy, but it is relevant because in any economy, so many times here in Florida, it just makes sense for them to stay in the same residence during the divorce. It's just really not economically feasible because maybe everything's tied up in the house has to sell. It makes the most sense. And are you saying that can't happen in North Carolina? Like you actually physically have to be away from one another, like living somewhere else?
Yeah, I am saying in the state of North Carolina, if you want to be divorced from your spouse, you physically have to live separate and apart for them for a year and a day before you can file a divorce. There is no, you live upstairs and I live downstairs and we can file for divorce.
Wow, that I can see how that would really impact people financially in that. And, you talked about how they bifurcate, okay? Because really most people, or my experience, with bifurcating, they're like, I just don't want to be married. Usually because they want to marry someone else. But they just don't want to be legally tied. They're like, we can work out everything else later, but I just don't want to be legally tied to you. And so those have been some of the instances where a bifurcation was ordered by the court to allow them to legally be divorced, but we still have to address, the children and the assets and liabilities. So that's really interesting that it's reversed in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's quite mind-blowing for most all my friends that practice in the other 49 states, particularly ones in Texas, because in Texas, you cannot get divorced until everything is worked out. There is no bifurcating. So they truly hold the divorce hostage to force either a settlement or the court to resolve the disputes.
That's really kind of the way it works here. It's like, you can imagine if one person really wants to be legally divorced, the other one's like, well, then why should I agree to that, right? There's some ulterior motive. So let's wrap it all up.
Yeah. But, so to tie it back to the economy, you're right. That makes in my place, North Carolina, things even tougher, right? Because they say like, we can't afford to separate yet. And I said, well, that's fine, but no, you're not going to be able to get divorced, for more than a year from whenever you are no longer living together. And people just look like deer in the headlights because that's not what you see on the internet mostly, right? So we've got to go back to smart divorce. We've got to create a plan. And a lot of time we have to do, I'm going to call it divorce planning. Like if this is what you want and you don't want to be married anymore, we've got to start talking about where do you want to be 3 months from now? And do we have enough runway to get you there? Or do we need to be looking at 6 months from now?
Mm-hmm. Well, and this, because I would wonder what it did compare in North Carolina, because that's really quite a difference. It's not just saying, no, we did separate our bank accounts, but I live on this side, he lives in this side, and we have not lived married, for a year, but that doesn't count if they're under the same roof. And, in the past, there's always been a link between divorce and inflation. And that's, what economists say. But then like in the 80s, when the inflation was this high, divorce rates dropped as the inflation went up because they really couldn't afford a divorce. And they got as much as the inflation and cost of living impacts a marriage, because we know finances really have a huge impact. It's like they're like, but we just can't do it now, and they look for alternative options. I wonder, and that probably is a lot of the case in North Carolina. You've got to be much more creative, and it just takes longer.
Yeah, I mean, some of what we have done in the past, we did during the housing crisis, and we're doing now is people do postnuptial agreements. And so at least they can address the property. We can't address alimony or custody or child support in a postnuptial agreement, but we can go ahead and deal with the property, and then they can continue to live together if that's what they choose to do in different bedrooms or different whatevers. But that's still not starting the clock for the divorce process. But there's a lot of reasons that people choose to stay married that are also related to the economy. You know, they may choose to stay married because they need the health insurance that one spouse is providing, right? They may choose to stay married because of some other benefits an employer provides, whether that's an HSA account. Some places around here, because we have a lot of tech companies, they provide free childcare, but it's only subsidized if depending on who the primary parent is, and they have weird rules and some things like that. So there's some economic reasons to stay married that we've had some couples come to us and like, we don't want to be attached anymore with bank accounts and this, that, and the other. We're going to separate. Financially, we can't cash flow two houses right now, but we want to go ahead and develop our property. And we've been doing that, but again, it doesn't help them get divorced any faster if that's their ultimate goal.
Right. Ultimately, yeah, to move forward. And I could see how it will, as inflation and changes in the economy, it actually seems like it's going to be more challenging for residents of North Carolina and require more planning and understanding of the value of that planning.
Yeah. Well, what are you seeing down in Jacksonville and the surrounding area with your housing markets and such?
Well, right now, they are so high, a little bit inflated, the prices for sure. And they, but there's not the inventory has, like, I guess, stayed a little bit more stable. Whereas a year ago, houses would be sold before the sign even went up, right? And it was crazy prices. And I think the rise of interest rates has slowed it a bit, and the way people were just overinflating their homes. But this was also, I think, in response to the COVID restrictions and the freedoms that Florida tends to offer for the majority of the individuals, which created more people rushing to our state, I think, to live and experience a little less restrictions from COVID.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Are you telling people who may have said, like, we can't afford to separate right now, that this could be the best time of their life to try to cash in on this housing market? Or
I have, because they think, well, I won't find a place to live, and it's, well, you can rent, but again, rent is definitely much higher. And it really depends. You've got to evaluate the whole picture, because if you have this opportunity now, that may be gone. So it's at least worth that conversation. Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break, but please join us when we come back, because we're going to talk again more on money and finances and the effects on a divorce. All right, thank you for joining us. As we were before, we're continuing the conversation with Jenny Bradley from Triangle Smart Divorce in North Carolina. And we've been talking about the current economy, the predictions or conspiracies on what is going to happen in the future. But really, when you're thinking about divorce, that matters, right? Because we know money and finances have always played a big part in a marriage, and one of the top reasons that people get divorced. And when the economy is not good, it can cause a real strain on the marriage. And I'm sure, Jenny, you've seen that as well, right? Throughout your practice, that financial concerns and disagreements or different beliefs on money, that just really affects the marriage in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. When we had the housing crisis, we had people that were very distressed because maybe the rent money wasn't coming in anymore, or the bank was restructuring their loan and they couldn't afford things anymore. And now that we're, I think, plunging into a recession at some point. I don't know when that will be. Like I said before, I'm not an economist, but I think the writing's on the wall that when the government printed a lot of money and put it out there, and this is what happens. It's just, it's there. Will we recover? Sure. The stock market always ends up and to the right, but it has its dips along the way. People just, a strained marriage gets even more strained when finances get tight.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, which, when we're talking, obviously about the houses and, where you're going to go, I also think, because you mentioned in the first segment, well, the job market is strong, right? People are out there working, looking for jobs, but I know particularly, and we have various types of alimony in Florida, which you can give us, maybe a little bit of information on North Carolina, but for the spouse, more often than not, it's the wife looking for alimony. A big roadblock or a big issue can be if their husband lost their job. And I remember that back, in the 2009 to 11, there's just a lot going on. And, when your spouse, who is the primary breadwinner, loses their job, that creates a whole nother stress, but it's really not good, right? Like in the middle of a divorce, or, when you then file for divorce, when you're looking for alimony.
Oh, yeah. And we certainly have not dealt with that nearly as much in the last year as we did 2 years prior, when companies were shutting down because of the government restrictions that you may not have had as many of in Florida, like we talked about in the prior segment. But that was a real problem. We represent both the breadwinner and both the dependent spouse. And it's been a problem on both sides, because the breadwinner, is completely freaking out because he's like, I got this, stereotypically, he's got this family support and he's got to take care of himself. And, bills are mounting and racking up and such. And that puts stress on the marriage. And then the dependent spouse is, like, we have childcare sometimes, and we have these bills, and we have housing expenses, and the inflation's going up. And as you said in the earlier segment, groceries are costing more, and it costs twice as much to fill up my gas tank and all those things. And it just kind of like, puts extra heat on a marriage that kind of was already on low boil, right? And so it's definitely something we've been having to work through, because in North Carolina anyway, if somebody's lost their job through no fault of their own, it's kind of hard to say, hey, well, they should be making $130,000. They should be making $60,000 or whatever your number is, because their employer let them go because their employer laid off 1,000 people, right? And so you've got to hit your windows right sometimes too, and give that spouse time to try to find a job before you go off trying to get alimony. And that's tough.
Right. It is tough. Yeah.
A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck and don't even have, what was the latest statistic I read? Don't even have $600 in their savings account. I don't remember what it was, but it was more than half of America has less than like a month's worth of bills in their savings account.
Mm-hmm. I find the job and alimony issue, we haven't had that in a long time, really, frankly, like I said, until like before it was around that 2009 to 2011, more of that issue. But now in Florida, what the courts will do is they will order, say, a nominal amount of alimony, because they can't order something if you have no income, and they won't put you in jail, unfortunately. I'm a big proponent of, you should go to jail if you don't pay, but they let you get away with it if you can't pay,
It's absolutely fun how fast that wallet opens up if somebody hits jail, isn't it?
Well, that is fascinating. I'll sit in jail before I pay you, until they do sit in jail, and then they do pay, when they have it. But what we'll do, the law is a little bit different. Well, I don't know if it's different. I'm going to tell you what it is in Florida. So you can get basically we do an evaluation, right? A vocational evaluation. So that they will say these jobs exist and they are qualified for them. Nobody requires proof that they'll get hired, right? But they say, hey, based on my interview and their skills, and I've searched the job market, these are available. So at that point, the court has the power to impute income to that individual, whether or not they can get that job or not. And that works both ways, right? Because many times the spouse wanting alimony, they're like, no, well, you could go work and you could earn X. So, that decreases the need for the alimony. But it will allow for an award of alimony that then could be modified, right, when things change and they maybe begin to make more money. Are those options that you see in North Carolina?
We do some. We have a little bit different of an element to it than you have said, and maybe you have this element you just didn't say, but we have to have, before we can get to imputing income, which is the fancy lawyer word for the court says you could make this much money, I don't care if you are or not. You have to show bad faith on behalf of the person who is not receiving an income right now. And so that one's a little trickier for us than as simply as you just put it. Because truly, if you lost your job through no fault of your own, your employer downsized you or whatever, that's not your fault, right? And it's reasonable to expect it might take you a month or two to be able to go find a job. And so that's why we have to kind of pick our windows a little bit better and not rush off in this period of immediate unemployment.
So, Jenny, one of the things that happen, obviously, when someone loses their job, particularly the breadwinner, is, okay, your alimony's at risk. And, you know, if they're out of work, it's not the best time to go file for divorce, even though you may really want to, because they're not working or not trying hard enough to get a new job. But here in Florida, when alimony is at issue, I mean, we have to prove they have the ability to pay. That's part of it. You may have the need, but if they don't have the ability, but then the question is, well, they could have the ability if they got another job. And so, or maybe they're underemployed, or maybe, you know, surprising, their business isn't doing as well during the divorce. They're not making as much. So the courts can make a decision that, well, I might order a nominal amount so that you have your alimony award, but you're going to have to go back and change it. Or I had this one time where the court, this was a trial, it was very contested, but they found that she needed more. He just wasn't making more. So she could easily go back, you know, if he started making more money once the divorce was done without the typical burden. But I was wondering, like, with North Carolina law and alimony, how does that differ or, you know, similar?
I think it's somewhat similar. I think we have one different little hoop we have to jump through than what you talked about. Same thing as far as the dependent spouse and what we call the supporting spouse. You know, you may have a need, but if there's not enough money there, then you may not get all your needs met. And that happens a lot. And that's not because of a job loss or underemployment. That's just the nature of, candidly, people have been overspending and now there's not enough money to go around because in our state anyway, a judge isn't going to order the supporting spouse, whether it's a man or a woman, to go live in a box in a van by the river or whatever. And the dependent spouse get all the needs met. They're going to somehow.
I don't know why they don't do that though. You know, I mean, sometimes, you know, I just feel like they ought to, but I
had a feeling you were going to say that when I used that example. But at any rate, they try to share the pain is what I call it. Like, you know, you were living on this situation and this is what we got. And what you're talking about, where someone's truly underemployed or unemployed, we have an element you don't have, it sounds like, and that element is bad faith. We have to show that that person, through their own actions, has created this unemployment situation or underemployment situation, or they're directly disregarding their duty to support their family. And frankly, those are a little bit hard to prove, right? Because it's easy if you screwed up at work. Like you show up to work and you're on drugs or you're high or you're drunk or whatever. Sure, we can show you that was your own fault. We can have a whole conversation later about whether that's a disability and all these things, but you took actions at work that caused you to get fired. If your employer just downsized and laid off 2,500 people, that's going to be hard to show there was bad faith. Where the bad faith is going to come in is if the person sits on their, you know what, for a period of time without trying to actively find a job. But if if the supporting spouse is applying and applying and applying and applying and can't find work, it's hard for us to get a vocational expert to convince the judge, oh, there's jobs out there. They should be able to get one of these because they're showing they're going and applying and they're not getting job offers.
Now, I think that is really interesting because would it be something where the court, or you just have to wait? Like, would the court do something like, all right, well, I find like alimony is appropriate, but he's got to, or she's got to get a job. So we're going to kind of maybe do a play saver, like rather than say no alimony, like, yeah, you're entitled to it, but that's going to have to be for another day when they get a job, or would that not happen often?
So I'm going to sound like a lawyer here and say it depends on what judge get that day and how they feel. That's probably the same in Florida too. Some judges would say, I'm going to put a placeholder here and put it on for review in 60 days, and I want to see what your job efforts have been.
Mm-hmm.
Some judges would say, I'm going to continue this and give him 60 days to try to find employment, and then we'll address all this at one time. I'm using him right now because stereotypically still most men are the breadwinners in the families. I know that's not true for everyone, but pardon me for being gender-based. And some judges simply would say, like, well, it's based upon the situation when you come into court. Right now, he doesn't have a job, so sorry, I can't award alimony. Bada bing, bada boom, done.
Which
Those
that would
run
be very,
like that. Huh?
yeah, I would say that like in that case, and if you envision that, you just have to tell you, like, you just got to wait. Like, it's not worth it if you are totally closed out from ever getting alimony.
I mean, you know, way back when I practiced law with 3 guys, one of them did criminal law. And you just knew that if you had a client that you were representing with certain facts, you didn't need to appear in front of Judge so-and-so, and you told your client, I know you want this resolved, but you need a continuance because we don't want the result in front of this judge. And that's kind of what you have to do. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, though, in my county, we have one judge, one family. So we can't escape the judge, but we can seek out go to a new date and hope by then somebody's found employment.
Right. So that would be a case where your best interest is to wait it out, at least for some point, because otherwise you lose that opportunity.
Yeah. Or maybe the spouse has gotten severance pay, so we could show that that's the income right now. So let's get alimony based upon the severance award. And then judge will reevaluate at a later date and come back in for our review. Maybe maybe they have income from some other place, like rental income or investment income or something like that.
All right, we're going to go for a quick break right now. And when we come back, we're just going to talk about solutions and what you can do. It is not all doom and gloom. All right, Jenny, we said we were going to talk about what they're going to do, but we got to come up with a few things, because I know when you're in an unhappy marriage, you do not want to hear, I got to wait for the economy to rebound, or I've just got to wait because it took you so long to get to this point where you want a divorce. And now you're like, what? They're telling me to wait. So what are some things that we can be creative for our potential clients and women out there who are wondering what to do?
It sounds like in Florida, you can be a little bit more creative than I can, because you can have people continue to live together while they file for divorce. So that's one thing you have for your clientele.
Yes, we do that. And you know what? Now I love it, Jenny, because now I can use this example when our clients are like very frustrated with it. But we're like, but no, think of how lucky you are. If you couldn't continue to live together and get a divorce if you were in North Carolina. So that will help us.
Yeah, that's great. Always tell someone stuff could be worse. That's so empowering, Heather. That's my sarcasm. No, honestly, I think that's a big benefit you have in your state that we don't have. And people ask that of us a lot. Can we continue to live together but speed up this process? And I'm like, no. We can settle everything. We can settle all your property. We can do a postnuptial agreement, but we can't do everything else. And we can't even sign an agreement about alimony until you're either separated or separation is imminent. That's how our laws are. So what can we do? Well, just because you don't have it down in writing and call it a separation agreement doesn't mean you can't start to divide your finances. Doesn't mean you can't start to put a budget together to see what it's going to cost you to be on your own. Who's going to keep the house? Are we going to sell the house? All these decisions that have to be made anyway when you're getting divorced, you just need to make them now with, your magic crystal ball about where you may be 2 years from now with this economy, right?
Right. Well, and like you said, I mean, and how are the housing prices, generally speaking, in your area of that, Raleigh, Durham, right? Like the whole triangle.
Yeah. Triangle area, which, if you're not from North Carolina, you probably don't know what that means. So it's basically Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and the surrounding areas around it, the Silicon Valley of the East, we call it. Mm-hmm. So housing prices they went crazy like they did everywhere. And then they kind of leveled off and they've continued to drop. But just like Jacksonville, the inventory's holding pretty steady. We're getting a fair amount of people moving to our area too because of the jobs in the tech sector. And, it might take you 3 months, 4 months to sell a house now, even with the rising interest rates. Whereas before, as you said in an earlier segment, people were snatching up houses before they even went on the MLS.
Right.
So,
Which in normal, like who even knows what normal is, but like there was a period of time, hey, that's just like, hey, it's gonna take about 6 months, 4 to 6 months probably to sell your house. So that's not unrealistic for most people.
no, I mean, candidly, Heather, I feel like we're getting back to a place where kind of we were before housing prices went crazy.
Mhm.
People are forgetting that just 2 years ago, it might have taken you 6 months, a year or more to sell a house. Now everybody wants it done yesterday. That's just probably not realistic right now. And I don't know if we'll ever see inflation go back to 2% either. You know, it's been there for a long time, and we know how the government manipulates interest rates and deals with inflations and all those things. I don't think sitting around and waiting if you're in an unhappy marriage is the right decision, because there's so much more cost that's not just economic.
Right. It's true. And that just wears on you, and affects you in every area of your life, that particularly, your health, your mental health, your physical health, that you really can't, get back in a lot of times. And, I like what you said, and really what North Carolina does, it really forces people, like, you kind of got to talk this through and work together to get separated physically so that we can move forward with the divorce.
Right. I mean, what if neither spouse wants to move out of the house, right? That's the stalemate I get all the time.
Indeed.
Well, we can't start anything for you then, unlike Florida where you can.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I get questioned all the time. Well, then that would be abandonment, which there is no such thing in Florida. Like, you're not abandoning anything. If you want to move out, there are a lot of reasons not to move out in Florida and a lot of reasons to move out. But I can see where engaging an attorney early in the process can be very helpful, because you almost, well, I don't know if you can, but it's almost as helping them mediate through, like, you guys got to make these decisions in order to go on with your life.
Yeah. And that's, I'm not in the day-to-day practice as much as I was 20 whatever years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm much more in the strategy meetings now with folks, and, what we even call the should I stay or should I go now plan that we tell the people and help them think about, like, what does this look like if I stay? What does this look like if I go? And if it's people having small disputes, can we work through those? Can we learn how to communicate better? Can we save our marriage? We're divorce lawyers who aren't necessarily in the business of thinking divorce is the right solution for everyone either. Mm-hmm. So going back to your solutions, that's one thing we have to evaluate. Is this something that can be worked through? And some things can not be worked through, right? When trust has been eroded, or there are difficulties in a marriage, or there are abuse issues and things along those lines. Those are definitely ones where we're like, we got to figure out how to get you out of this.
Jenny, I got a question for you, because this just popped in my head. So, and I need to know, because this is something that we do in Florida, we can do. Okay, a woman client comes to you. She's not the breadwinner. She doesn't really have a whole lot of knowledge of what's going on, but she knows she wants out. Can she engage you? And is there anything you can do through the court system to make him leave?
Two different things in North Carolina you can do. One is a domestic violence protective order if she truly has been a victim of domestic violence, right? Like, you don't want to start off on a bad foot filing one of those fraudulently, because then your whole case is going to implode on you.
Absolutely.
And then the other one is this other thing, and I said earlier, North Carolina is kind of archaic. It is called a divorce from bed and board, going back to ancient English times. It is different than an absolute divorce. It does not dissolve your marriage. It does not terminate your marriage. It truly just basically is a judicial legal separation with a kick-out order. You can only get one of those if the other spouse, whether they're dependent or supporting, has committed marital misconduct. Marital misconduct, Heather's going to go, what does that mean in your state, right? Those are things like abandoning the spouse, still something in my state.
Okay.
Constructive abandonment of the house, which is like, hey, we're staying in the same household, but you've disengaged from the marriage. Also abuse that wouldn't fall under domestic violence abuse, things like mental cruelty and emotional abuse. Mm-hmm. And so we have that tool in our arsenal. Oh, well, and additionally, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and other things.
Like adultery, infidelity, does that work?
Yeah, that would be one of those too.
So it's almost, which it may, obviously your state is, like, you can still have at fault.
Yeah.
You do have to prove that if maybe you really want to move forward and they don't, or just, going to be passive and not do anything.
Yeah, we just had a lawyer in my office go to court on one yesterday and got the husband kicked out of the house because he's 3 weeks of the year, he's in another 3 weeks of the month, he's in another country with his mistress, we'll just say a nice word here. And then the other back at the house and not treating the wife or the kid very nicely. And the judge was like, well, then go on with your bad self, sir, and kicked him out of the house.
So now the clock can start ticking for her, right?
That's right.
On the divorce part, because that's the
right.
physical separation.
Try to get blood from the turnip, right? And get her some support and some other things, but that will be another battle for another day.
So he won't do that in the same hearing? Like kick him out plus give her support? Oh my goodness, Jenny. I almost feel like you should really be doing something to change these laws, because that seems very inefficient.
Well, our whole court system is very inefficient because we have these little time things, like this whole hearing yesterday was a 30-minute hearing. Each side got 30 minutes to present their case. We have trial by stopwatch.
So, Jenny, it definitely sounds like, there are certain obstacles in North Carolina just on timing that in and of itself really are a compelling case to work together for creative solutions.
Yeah, of course, you're going to have the individuals who can't because of personality conflicts or trust reasons or whatever else. But that's what we tell people all the time here is the more you can work together and you can work out, number one, you keep control of the situation, right? If you go to the courthouse and you're in front of a judge, he or she's going to make the decision they think is right. And it might not be what either of you want, right? So you maintain some level of control if you work together. But you also get to have creativity. Like, the judges are bound by the laws that are in their books, and they can only do the things that they can do. We can say, you know what? Let's own the house together for 3 years till our youngest one gets out of high school, and then let's sell the house and see where things are then. Judge isn't going to let that happen in my state anyway.
Yeah, but I think it's a good idea. Like, yes, sometimes you still don't ever know. Even though we could have tried a case in front of a judge so many times, at the end of the day, they may agree or disagree with that argument on one side or the other. And I think what you really tapped into that I do think is so important is the control over that ultimate decision. And the only way to do that is by, coming to an agreement, which when it's possible, I always agree, like, hey, it allows you to potentially get things that you're never going to get in front of a judge. But if you're going to get something you're not going to get in front of a judge, you're probably going to have to compromise on maybe something where you wouldn't have, right? Like, it's that give and take.
Yeah. I don't know about Florida, but in North Carolina, alimony cannot be secured by life insurance. So you might have gotten this tremendous alimony award in court. Unfortunately, your ex-spouse dies in 2 years and you had a 20-year alimony award. You're out of luck, right? But in an agreement, you could say, hey, let me own a life insurance policy on you so that this is secured. In North Carolina, we can't deal with college expenses at all. Once kids are 18 and out of high school, that's it. But in an agreement, you can say, this is how we're going to deal with college. This is how we're going to deal with weddings. You can be as creative as you want to be.
Yes. And same here in Florida. Like, now, sometimes you can get life insurance, but it used to be automatically always awarded, and it's not any longer. So now it's definitely something when you're able to do that within a settlement agreement, we can. Same thing here in college. Once they're 18, they're responsible. So therefore, if you can get creative in a settlement and, really come up with ideas that are what you two want. And I always try to definitely explain it the way that we were just talking about it, something that you wouldn't have gotten in court. So then you do feel like you won, which of course is the name of the show, because I think you can win if you get what you want. And it doesn't mean that other person has to lose, right? You still achieve your goal. That's winning. And if you can do that, you really sometimes have to be a little bit more open to compromise and creative solutions, I think.
Oh, definitely. It's give and take 100%. But the beauty of it is, like you said, you get to kind of craft your own settlement, right? As long as the other side will agree.
And, many times I find, and I was talking with another guest, or, we were looking at, that is sometimes a great strategy to negotiate is litigation. Sometimes you have to, have a little bit of court time and hearings for both parties to be a little bit more motivated to then settle now that they've actually seen the person who's going to make the ultimate decision in their case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. Like, what people know about divorce is what we see on TV, what we read books about, what's in the movies, right? And that's drama, because drama sells. That's about the last thing you actually want when you're going through a divorce is drama. Drama is expensive on your financial resources. It's expensive to your emotions, to your physical well-being, just all around, disastrous for your children to be stuck in the middle of that. And so I don't think people really know what it means to go to court sometimes. And sometimes they have to go have a taste of that to be like, whoa, what just happened? I don't want to ever see that judge again. I think you're dead on target there.
Yeah, now, how often, because we are almost done, and as we wrap this up, though, how often in North Carolina do cases go to court because of all this timeline and everything? I'm just curious, like if you have any kind of percentages or experience with most of your cases.
I can talk about my law firm's cases and the lawyers who are here across the state. I'm not comfortable saying, but I will say that the drivers to end up in court is when the other person doesn't have a lawyer. So they just don't know the law or what the possibilities are or what the problems are with the case, right? When you have somebody who has a high conflict personality disorder, a narcissist, like you talk a lot about on this show, sometimes you have to go to court because they're never wrong, right?
Right, yeah.
They'll never see anything your way and they'll gaslight you to death all along the path. And then we end up in court a fair amount on custody, more than I would like, honestly. But those are usually situations where one person or the other thinks that the other parent shouldn't be able to be a parent. Like, oh, these are my babies and I'm not going to let you see them at all. And that's just not a good idea, generally speaking, unless there's a lot of harm in the way. And then the flip side, we've had men be like, she's never going to see the children again. I was like, no, that doesn't work that way. These extremist positions are what we seem to go to court on. The money stuff, more times than not, we work out unless there's some job loss, like we were talking about in an earlier segment. So it's interesting, Heather, because probably 40% of our caseload is labeled as a litigation case. Hardly any of those see the courtroom for all facets of the case. Most all of them settle out.
Wow. Well, yeah, and we most of our cases see the courtroom at some point or another for a part of it, but the vast majority resolve in mediation. But right. I would think that because of the laws that you have, it really behooves everybody so much to work harder to get to the finish line just on that one time constraint and different things, which I find fascinating. So Jenny, thank you so much for joining us, because I don't practice in North Carolina and don't think I will aspire to at the moment, but I love learning about it because that's how we, can obviously compare and tell our clients, right? It could be worse.
Well, thank you for having me, Heather. It's been a delight.
Well, it's wonderful. And thank you for all the listeners today. And we really appreciate having Jenny Bradley here from Triangle Smart Divorce. And you can find out more about Jenny and her firm at trianglesmartdivorce.com. And of course, the link will be in the show notes. And we so appreciate having you today, Jenny. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. If you or someone you know is looking for answers regarding divorce, reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com and also join the conversation on social at Women Winning Divorce. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.